Hey YouTube, what's going on? Danny here with Danny's Tech Channel. If this is your first time here, I frequently do hardware reviews, PC builds, and every now and then I'll throw in a little how-to video too. Parts availability is non-existent these days, from GPUs to CPUs, you name it, it's out of stock. So I finally got in a couple different things. First thing I got was the Ryzen 5 5600X. It's a 6-core, 12-thread processor. It's AMD's newest architecture. It's their Zen 3 processing node. They made a couple different processors with this set. It's the 5600X, the 5800X, the 5900X, and the 5950X. However, all of them have been extremely elusive. I was able to get a 5600X. I really wanted to get it for testing against some of these other CPUs because I've had my Intel i5-10600K, as you may know, for a little while now. I was able to get a hold of the new 30 series graphics cards finally. If you want to find out how I got that, I'll leave a link in the description below for my NZXT BLD Experience. I just did a video on that last week, and that's how I got this graphics card. And this is the Gigabyte Aorus Master RTX 3060 Ti. I did buy that straight out. It was from one of those Newegg combo deals, but I didn't care. It was a way for me to get an RTX 3060 Ti, and I didn't have to pay an outrageous scalping price for it. So that's all the new hardware that I got recently. I just want to kind of tell you about what I'm working with here, and I have it down in the description what parts I used and everything for this test bench, and it's on all of my benchmark sheets and slides saying what I was using. My video actually started out as a head-to-head battle between the CPUs. I was like, i5, Ryzen 5, which one should you pick? But the more I did the video and the longer I was testing and everything, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. So I guess technically you could just stop watching the video now, but if you want to see the actual benchmarks and stuff, keep watching. I use the RTX 3070 because it is the highest grade GPU I have, and I wanted to pair it with all three of these processors to see what kind of performance I could get out of it at 1080p and 1440p. If you're in the market for a 3070, this is kind of geared towards you, and my video turned into from what chip you should buy to what you should be pairing with the 3070. So who needs an RTX 3070? Well, I mean, you probably do, right? I think the best customers for this type of a card are going to be esports gamers that want to get above 144 or 240 hertz gaming at 1080p, or if you want to play at 1440p, you can still get above 100 hertz refresh rate in every game I've tested. So this does that perfectly fine with any of these processors, by the way. But let's take a look at some of the benchmarks and you'll understand what I mean. Real quick, the hardware that I used was the same across the board as far as the RAM goes and as far as the power supply and the cooler and everything. I have a Corsair H115i Pro RGB liquid cooler here. It's a 280 mil cooler, and I use that for both the Ryzen and the Intel processors. I have G.Skill 16 gigabyte Trident Z running at 3200 megahertz speed. And I have an EVGA 850 watt G5 power supply. It's an 80 plus gold power supply. All three of the processors I have here are the ones that I ran and tested. I ran the Ryzen 5 3600, I ran the Ryzen 5 5600X, and then I ran the i5 10600K. I didn't enable anything in the BIOS other than, XMP or DOCP, depending on AMD or Intel. So that was it, because that's the way I see it, is that's what most people are gonna be doing. A lot of people will understand how to enable XMP settings to get the most out of their RAM, but most people don't want to mess with overclocking and stuff like that. You just want to plug it in, play some games, and enjoy yourself. So if you look at the results here on the benchmarks, I did Rainbow Six Siege first, and I'm going to show that right away because that's the biggest gap as far as your numbers go. If you look at the 1080p performance, the 10600K is not the leader in this one. Now, if you overclock it, it may push out some higher frame rates, but the 5600X got 411.5 average FPS, 1080p gaming. This is all on ultra settings, by the way, the ultra presets. I didn't enable any kind of, in all these testings, I didn't enable any kind of DLSS or ray tracing or anything like that. I just wanted it strictly right out of the box performance, so you can get an idea if you have like a RX 6800 or some other variant of a card that's kind of similar to a 3070, you can expect performance like this too. So let's jump over to 1440p in Rainbow Six Siege. When you get to 1440p, the GPU becomes the bottleneck. And this is a 3070, so I mean, even if you get a 3080 or 3090, you're gonna run into GPU bottlenecks at that high of a resolution. Taking a look at 1440p, the Ryzen 5 5600X is not in the lead this time. It got 309.9 FPS average. The 10600K pulled ahead just a tad bit at 312.2 FPS. This kind of shows you the architectural improvements from the 5600 to the 3600. The 3600 just trails behind a little bit each time. Next game we're gonna take a look at is Call of Duty Warzone. With the 10600K, we once again pull out ahead at 218 FPS, and the 5600X comes in at 198.5, and the 3600 comes in at 162.3. Once again, it's only 20 FPS difference between the 10600K and the 5600X, but things change a little bit when you move on to 1440p in Warzone. The 10600K is at 142.9 FPS, and the 5600X jumps up a little bit to 149.1. And then the 3600 is trailing at 140.7. So like I keep saying, the 3600 is trailing just a tad, and that's just its clock speed differential there, and then architectural improvements between the 5600X and the 3600. But you can see, or you can start to see, the GPU bottleneck better in this game as opposed to like Rainbow Six Siege, where it got 300, 200 FPS. The higher the FPS number, the bigger the gap you're gonna see from the CPU side of things, because the CPU is limiting the frames at that point. But when it's a graphical issue, the GPU is gonna bottleneck it. Next game I wanna look at is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is fairly graphically intense, especially if you turn like ray tracing on and stuff like that, which I did not, remind you. Looking at 1080p performance, we have the 5600X leading the pack here with 148.9 FPS. The 10600K is at 133.8 FPS, and the 3600 is at 117. Now, I threw in the 10900K into this benchmark test against Shadow of the Tomb Raider because I wanted to see how much of a bottleneck the CPUs were being on the GPU. I wanted to see if it actually, sorry, this is the 10850K. I'm gonna call it the 10900. My mistake if I do, but 10850K, I threw that in there. The 10850K got 149.6 FPS. So that's right on par with the 5600X. So, and that's 10 cores, 20 threads. It runs out of the box at 5 gigahertz. So it doesn't matter if you have a $500 i9 or a $300 5600X. You're gonna get the same performance out of this 3070 with all those chips. So I guess my point of the whole thing is save your money. Don't get an i9, don't get a Ryzen 9 5900X or whatever if you don't need it. If those cores aren't gonna do you any benefit for something other than gaming, these are just fine. All of them, any of them, whatever you would wanna do. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, when you get to 1440p performance, this proves my point. The i9 runs 121 FPS, the i5 runs 118.5 or 0.6, and the 5600X runs 119.5. Let's take a look at my last benchmark, and this shrunk the gap almost entirely. Not at 1080p, but it's close. The 10600K ran 146.6, the 5600X ran 142.2, and the 3600 closed the gap at 1080p at 139.3. Now, when we move over to 1440p, it disappears entirely. There is no gap. I added the 10900K back in to 1440p just to kind of prove my point to myself, but I threw it in the chart just so you can kind of see. So the 10900 or the 10850K got 104.6, the 10600 got 103.1, and then the 5600X got 101.2, and the 3600 got 101.9. This proves my point perfectly. It doesn't matter which processor you get, it really doesn't. I was gonna make this whole video on which processor you should buy and what you should be doing and stuff like that. There we go. That's been glaring the whole time and nobody told me. So I was gonna make this whole video about which processor you should buy and that Ryzen is better than Intel or Intel is better than Ryzen. That battle is gonna be going on for years. But for you, the consumer, and even for me as a consumer, if you're gonna get a RTX 3070, whether it be the Founders Edition or any of these AIB partners, you'd be fine getting any of these 3 chips. You'd be fine getting a 10900K. It's all gonna be the same gaming performance within very close numbers at 1440p because you are GPU bottleneck. But if you're looking for suggestions, recommendations, whatever, the 5600 is gonna be your esports gaming champion as far as getting a 3070 and putting it at 1080p. The 5600 consistently got the highest frame rates at 1080p. The 3600, in my eyes, is the best performance for cost for 1440p. Because as you can see, your GPU bottlenecked, as I keep saying with the 3070, so none of those other chips are really gonna make much difference gaming at 1440p. I ran max settings with the 3600 just fine, and I can wait, like if you spend $199 for the 3600, and they're in stock, don't forget, and then you go down the road this summer and the 5900X or the 5800X or whatever comes back into stock, maybe they'll even drop the price, you never know. You can pick one of those up and pop it right in your system and it'll work just fine. And then you can sell your 3600 probably for about the same price you bought it for. But as far as stock and availability goes for the RTX 30 series cards and the AMD 6000 series, I'm really sorry that the way things are going right now, it doesn't look good for anybody. It really doesn't. I myself am constantly on the computer, hovering Twitch and stuff. There's some guys that do like little stock checkers and everything. I just sit there and I'll comment with people, you know, hey, did anybody get one yet? Did you get one yet? And that's how I got my 3060 Ti. So I'm actually gonna be using that in a build next week, and I can't wait because it looks really good with the motherboard that I chose too. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already subscribed, don't forget to hit subscribe below. It really helps me out. I really appreciate everyone that's subscribed so far and all the viewers that continuously come back and watch my videos. That's the kind of thing that keeps me going and makes me want to continue to do stuff like this to educate you and help you with your PC building endeavors. I keep wanting to use the mouse and keyboard here. It's not even plugged in. This is not attached to anything. I don't know why I did this. There's nothing in this box. As I always say, I'm Danny with Danny's Tech Channel, and I'll see you in the next video.